A wave of sheer terror washed over the young Vorkarian students, their iridescent scales rippling as they learned the horrifying truth that humanity's ancient war fleet had once brought their mighty empire to its knees. In the faintly lit classroom, Ymir projected a vast hologram of the Milky Way's swirling spiral arms. With a flick of his long fingers, he magnified the territory the Vorkarian Empire had once dominated, a sprawling swath of space spanning over 1,000 star systems at the Empire's zenith. The students, all 50 of their wide eyes glued to the mesmerizing projection, listened with rapt attention as Ymir recounted the Vorkarians' awe-inspiring military strength and unrivaled technological prowess during that glorious era. But then, Ymir's voice lowered to a hushed tone. His eyes narrowed as he revealed the shocking event that had shaken the galaxy. Humanity, a species from an unremarkable planet in a remote fringe of the Milky Way, had done the unthinkable, stood up to the Vorkarians, and won. Ymir switched the projection to a zoomed view of Earth, the human homeworld, a blue marble orbiting a nondescript yellow star. The Vorkarian expedition fleet had discovered the human colony on Theta Centauri 4 almost by accident. Captain Zaxia's scout ship had been on a routine survey mission when they stumbled upon the primitive settlement, ramshackle structures, technology centuries behind the Vorkarians. At first, Zaxia had been amused, even pitying the humans. But then 3 human warships had streaked out from Theta Centauri 4's moon without warning, guns blazing, taking the Vorkarian vessel completely by surprise. Admiral Tyler Baker's brilliant unorthodox tactics had overwhelmed Zaxia's crew despite the humans' outdated ships. Outmaneuvered and outgunned, the crippled Vorkarian scout ship was soon broadcasting its unconditional surrender on all frequencies. The impossible had happened. A minor human fleet had vanquished an imperial Vorkarian military vessel. Ymir paused the playback on the flickering image of the battered Vorkarian ship, its iridescent hull scorched and breached from the merciless human barrage. The young Vorkarian students gaped in stunned, horrified silence at the inconceivable scene. There it was, undeniable proof that the humans had accomplished the unthinkable. If news of this spread, it could incite rebellion across the Empire's colonies, or worse, inspire the humans to attempt a full-scale war. The Vorkarians had to stamp out this spark before it ignited an inferno that consumed their precious star-spanning dominion. The survival of their species and empire depended on it. Ymir's eyes gleam as he describes the fate of the captured Vorkarian scout ship and its crew. The crippled vessel was towed back by the human fleet to Theta Centauri 4, the site of the fledgling human colony. There, Admiral Tyler Baker oversaw the interrogation of the Vorkarian prisoners, including Captain Zaxia himself. "Imagine the shock of the Vorkarian crew," Ymir says, his voice tinged with grudging admiration. They expected torture, humiliation, the same brutality they would have inflicted on captured enemies, but instead the humans treated them with a respect and dignity completely foreign to the Vorkarian way of war. Admiral Baker himself sat across from Zaxia in the interrogation room, his steely blue gaze boring into the captive Vorkarian captain. Zaxia tried every trick, every deception he knew to mislead his human captor, but Baker seemed to see through every lie, every half-truth. "How did he do it?" Ymir asks rhetorically, his long fingers stroking his chin. Some say Baker had studied Vorkarian psychology and culture, that he knew how to get inside their heads. Others claim he had a preternatural intuition, a sixth sense for the truth. Whatever the reason, Zaxia and his crew talked. And what they revealed sent shockwaves through the human high command. The true extent of the Vorkarian Empire, the location of key shipyards, fortresses, and even their homeworld. All this and more, the Vorkarians gave up to Admiral Baker's relentless questioning. Armed with this priceless intelligence, Baker knew he had to act fast, Ymir says, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. The Vorkarians would surely come for their lost ship and crew. Retaliation was inevitable. So Baker devised a plan as audacious as it was desperate, a preemptive strike on the Vorkarian homeworld itself. The classroom erupts in shocked murmurs and gasps. Strike the Vorkarian homeworld, with a mere 50 ships, against the full might of the Imperial Armada, madness. Madness, Ymir agrees, nodding. That's what Baker's own officers said. They urged caution, delay, building up their forces, but Baker would not be swayed. He knew every moment of hesitation gave the Vorkarians more time to mobilize their fleet. It was now or never. So the human fleet set out from Theta Centauri IV, a paltry 50 ships against an empire that spanned 1,000 worlds. As they crossed into Vorkarian space, long-range scans picked up the energy signatures of the Imperial Armada, over 500 warships, a force that could obliterate the humans with a single volley. The students are on the edge of their seats now, Ymir says, his voice rising to a fevered pitch. 50 against 500, outgunned, outmanned, outmatched in every way. So how did they do it? How did Baker snatch victory from the jaws of certain defeat? Well, Ymir's voice rises to a crescendo as he describes the opening salvo of the climactic battle. The Vorkarian Armada unleashed a devastating barrage of plasma torpedoes and laser fire, the searing beams crisscrossing the void of space in a deadly web. The human fleet, dwarfed by the sheer size and number of the Vorkarian ships, took evasive action. They weaved and dodged, their smaller, more agile craft dancing between the streams of superheated plasma. But even their lightning reflexes couldn't save them all. Several human ships caught in the onslaught burst apart in soundless explosions, their hulls shattered and crews consumed by the merciless vacuum of space. The students gasp, some covering their mouths in horror at the vivid description of the destruction. Yet Admiral Baker, faced with such staggering losses right from the start, did not falter. His voice, calm and steady over the fleet comm, ordered his ships to close in, to engage the Vorkarians at point-blank range. It was a bold move, some might say suicidal, but Baker had a plan. The human ships surged forward, their advanced shields shimmering as they absorbed the brunt of the Vorkarian fire. They slipped between the lumbering Vorkarian battleships, strafing their hulls with volleys from their secret weapon, the gamma-ray burst cannons. Ymir pauses, letting the anticipation build before revealing the true genius of these human-made cannons. Unlike the plasma and laser weapons favored by the Vorkarians and most other spacefaring races, these cannons fired concentrated bursts of gamma radiation. The Vorkarian shields, designed to deflect heat and physical projectiles, offered no defense against this invisible, deadly assault. One by one, the mighty Vorkarian ships faltered, their shields flickering and failing under the onslaught. Explosions blossomed along their hulls as the gamma-ray bursts found their mark, tearing through deck after deck. The Vorkarian formation began to crumble, ships listing and drifting as their crews scrambled to restore power and seal hull breaches. For a moment, it seemed the tide had turned in favor of the vastly outnumbered humans, but Ymir's voice drops to a whisper as he describes the Vorkarians' hidden trump card. From the depths of the Vorkarian fleet, a massive dreadnought decloaked, shimmering into view like a nightmare made manifest. The Invincible, flagship of the feared Admiral Zortak, had entered the fray. Its advanced stealth technology had allowed it to slip undetected through the chaos of battle, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And strike it did. Its immense plasma cannons, each capable of obliterating a human ship with a single shot, began to glow with an eerie red light. The Invincible picked off the human vessels one by one, the burning beams slicing through their hulls with terrifying ease. Faced with this unstoppable juggernaut, Admiral Baker made the only choice he could. His voice heavy with the weight of the lives already lost, he ordered the fleet to fall back, to regroup and rethink their strategy. As the battered human ships limped away from the battle, their reactors straining to power their damaged engines, Ymir pauses once more. The students lean forward, breathless with anticipation. What miracle could possibly save the humans now against such overwhelming odds? Ymir's eyes glint with a hint of admiration, a grudging respect for the tenacity and ingenuity of these upstart primates. Admiral Baker, he says softly, had one last desperate gamble, one final ace to play, a weapon so powerful, so terrifyingly destructive, that even the Vorkarian High Command hesitated to use its like. The Nova Bomb, they called it. Ymir's voice drops to a whisper as he describes the desperate gambit. the room hanging on his every word. The Nova bomb, he says, was a weapon born of desperation and genius in equal measure, a device that could warp the very fabric of space-time itself, creating a localized gravitational anomaly so intense that no ship, no matter how large or well-shielded, could hope to survive. He pauses, letting the enormity of such a weapon sink in. The students, their eyes wide with a mix of awe and horror, lean forward in their seats. Admiral Baker knew that the Nova bomb was their only hope, Ymir continues, but to use it he needed to get the Invincible exactly where he wanted it. And so, he devised a plan as audacious as it was risky. The holographic projection shifts, zooming in on a dense asteroid field. Baker ordered his fleet to lure the Invincible into this treacherous region of space, Ymir explains, where the Vorkarian dreadnought's advanced cloaking device would be rendered useless by the constant barrage of space rocks. The students watch, transfixed, as the holographic ships weave and dodge through the field, the Invincible in hot pursuit. Its plasma cannons fire relentlessly, vaporizing asteroids and human ships alike with each devastating volley. But Baker had one final trick up his sleeve, Ymir says, his voice rising with the tension. He ordered his flagship, the Odyssey, to drop out of warp directly above the Invincible, putting itself in point-blank range of the dreadnought's guns. The students gasp as the Odyssey appears, its hull already scarred and battered from the fierce fighting. The Invincible, sensing an easy kill, begins to turn its cannons on the lone human ship. And that, Ymir says, his voice dropping once more, is when Baker gave the order. The hologram flashes white, a blinding burst of light that forces the students to shield their eyes. When it clears, the Invincible is gone, replaced by a swirling vortex of twisted metal and shattered rock. The Nova bomb tore the Invincible apart, Ymir says softly, along with every Vorkarian ship unfortunate enough to be caught in its wake. In an instant, the tide of battle had turned. The remaining Vorkarian ships, their formations broken and their morale shattered, begin to flee, their captains no doubt weighing the shame of retreat against the prospect of annihilation. Ymir pauses, his head bowed, but the victory, he says, came at a terrible cost. The hologram shifts once more, displaying the gutted remnants of the human fleet. Over half the ships are gone, reduced to drifting debris and frozen corpses. And Admiral Baker, Ymir says, his voice heavy with sorrow, the man who had led them to this impossible triumph, lay dying on the bridge of the Odyssey, his body ravaged by the Nova bomb's lethal radiation. The students sit in stunned silence, the weight of the sacrifice, the sheer scale of the loss, hitting them like a physical blow. But even as he lay there, Ymir continues, his life ebbing away, Baker knew that their sacrifice had not been in vain. The Vorkarian Empire, its military might crippled by the loss of the Invincible, and so many of its ships, had no choice but to sue for peace. The projection changes one final time, showing the signing of the Treaty of Theta Centauri. Admiral Baker, his face gaunt and his body frail, stands opposite the imposing figure of Emperor Zorvan. The treaty, Ymir explains, established a neutral zone between our two empires, a buffer to prevent future conflicts, and it forbade the development of weapons like the Nova bomb, ensuring that such devastation could never be unleashed again. As the projection fades, Ymir looks out over his students, his gaze solemn. And that, he says, is the story of how humanity, against all odds, brought the mighty Vorkarian Empire to its knees, a tale of bravery, sacrifice, and the indomitable human spirit. He leans forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. But the story, my young students, does not end there, for even as the ink dried on the treaty, new threats were stirring in the depths of space, threats that would test humanity's resolve like never before. Ymir's voice takes on a somber tone as he reveals the final, chilling aftermath of the legendary Battle of Theta Centauri. The Treaty of Theta Centauri, for all its promise of peace, sowed the seeds of future conflict, he says, his eyes scanning the faces of his students. The death of Admiral Baker, the hero of humanity, left a void in the hearts of his people, a void filled with bitterness, mistrust, and a thirst for revenge. In the decades that followed, the Vorkarian Empire, though weakened, refused to accept defeat. Behind the facade of the treaty, they funneled vast resources into rebuilding their shattered fleet. In hidden shipyards and secret research facilities, Vorkarian scientists and engineers worked tirelessly to develop new weapons, new shields, new engines, all designed with one purpose in mind: to counter the technological edge that had given humanity its shocking victory. But the humans were not idle. Ymir's voice grows cold as he describes the paranoia and suspicion that gripped Earth's leadership in the wake of the treaty. They knew, he says, that the Vorkarians could not be trusted, that the treaty was a fragile thing, a temporary reprieve at best. And so the humans too began to arm themselves. New warships rolled off the production lines, bristling with advanced weaponry reverse-engineered from captured Vorkarian technology. Spy satellites and long-range probes kept a constant watch on Vorkarian space, alert for any sign of renewed aggression. Thus began, Ymir intones, a cold war between the two empires, an arms race that threatened to spiral out of control at any moment. He pauses, letting the gravity of his words sink in. Then, with a heavy sigh, he fast-forwards a century, to a time when the promise of peace had all but faded from memory. It started, he says, with a series of border skirmishes. Human and Vorkarian ships patrolling the edges of the neutral zone, exchanging fire over perceived incursions and imagined slights. The holographic display flickers, showing grainy footage of sleek human fighters engaging bulbous Vorkarian cruisers, the void of space lit by the flash of plasma cannons and the flare of exploding ships. Each side accused the other of violating the treaty, of crossing the carefully drawn lines that had kept the peace for 100 years. Ymir's voice drops to a whisper, but the truth, as is often the case, was more complex, more dangerous, for there were those on both sides who saw profit in war, who believed that the time had come to settle the score, to finish what had started all those years ago at Theta Centauri. He leans forward, his gaze intense. Many historians now believe, he says, that the Treaty of Theta Centauri was never more than a ceasefire, a temporary lull in a war that had never truly ended. As the lecture draws to a close, Ymir fixes his students with a piercing stare. "Remember this," he says, his voice ringing with authority. "The lessons of history are not to be ignored, for those who forget the past are doomed to repeat it." With that, he dismisses the class. The students file out, their minds buzzing with the implications of what they have learned. The echoes of past battles, of heroic sacrifices and bitter losses, seem to hang heavy in the air. Ymir slumps in his chair, his eyes drawn to the holographic star map that dominates the front of the classroom. The glowing points of light, each representing a star system, a potential battleground, seem to mock the fragile peace that hangs by a thread. His eyes finds the tiny, flashing dot that represents Theta Centauri, the place where it all began, the birthplace of a legend, and perhaps the graveyard of an empire. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.